Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima. Welcome back to Blue Boards. This time we're going to be checking out Hanamikoji by Kota Nakayama and Maijali-chan. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that, I apologize, Asian names and all of that. So, this is a game about earning the favour of the 7 maidens, and you do this by giving them gifts. And these gifts are marked with their colour and their number, of course. You will perform these 4 actions, one of each turn, until you've performed all of them, and once both players of this 2-player game have figured this out, you will go to the scoring, at which point the player that has the most gifts on their side will earn the favour of the maiden. And if a player manages to earn the favour of 4 maidens, or 11 points worth of maidens, noted by the number on the card there, they win. But if neither player manages to do that, it moves on to the next round, where you play basically the same game again, but the alignments of the maidens change, so that it makes the game a little bit more interesting, because unless the opponent manages to beat you in the amount of gifts, you can afford to tie or just leave no gifts out there, and therefore you will maintain the maiden. So with the cards that you get, you start with a hand of 6, and due to the way that the game is set up, you'll take 1 card and put it out of play to keep the puzzle that little bit more interesting. At the beginning of every turn, you will draw a new card for your hand, assuring that the entirety of the deck will run out, and all of the gifts except this one here will be out on the playing field by the end of the round. And the 4 actions you can take are as follows. You can take 1 card from your hand and put it face down. That is your secret card. It will be scored at the end, so that you've got something that you can trip up the opponent with. You can also choose to discard 2 cards, and they will not be scored. You can give the opponent a choice of 3 cards, at which point they will take 1 and put it on their side, and then you take the remaining cards and put them on your side. Or, you can do roughly the same thing, but instead of having 3 cards and having them pick 1, you put out 2 pairs of cards. So I could put out this 2-2 and this 4-5 and be like, hey, what do you want? They'll take what they want, and you take what's left. So it gives you a little bit of room to maneuver, because you can pick any of those 4 actions that you haven't done at the beginning of the game, therefore giving you just that little bit of flexibility. And you can think through a lot of the game that's going on here, because since you know the amount of cards that are in the game, you know that all of these are going to be dealt out to both players eventually, and you know that there's going to be a secret card, and there's going to be some discards, and a card that's going to be out of play completely. So depending on the way the cards come out, you might be able to think through what the opponent has, or what the opponent will want to do, depending on what comes out of the deck over the next couple of turns. And this can make for some really interesting things, because you might think, okay, there's 1 5 on my side. I've got 2 5s in my hand. Pretend I've got a hand here. And I've discarded the other 2 5s. So I know that's not going to be his main focus. He's going to be focusing on some of these other things. I could give him 3 cards, see which one he takes, and then use the rest of my actions in order to work around what he does over his next couple of turns. There is some strategy like that, where you can figure out what the opponent's doing. But considering that this deck is pretty big, and you're only going to have the 6 cards in your hand as information at the beginning of the game, you might pick another action and find yourself completely out of strategies just because you just didn't have the information to work with. And that makes things a little bit disappointing, because while it is possible to earn yourself a neat little strategy over the course of doing some really clever thinking, it can end up at the point where you've used 2 actions and they either didn't give you the information you needed, or it's ended up screwing up your strategy because the opponent acted in a different way than expected, leaving you holding the bag of a really bad strategy through no fault of your own, or at least that's what it ends up feeling like. And it doesn't feel like you've really got any way around this, especially if you're the first player, because again, the first player just kind of has to act out without any knowledge whatsoever. And this can end up railroading your strategy towards the end of the game, because of course when you've got less actions to use, it means that you can't pick any other actions, and when you're down to your last action, you just have to play out what's there and hope that the card that comes out of the deck either fits with your strategy, or it's something that you were expecting to come along, because, well, if it wasn't, that means that you might end up losing the game purely on that last card draw and that last action you had left over, and it feels like it's not under your control. It isn't too bad because you can easily lose the game in one round and then move on to another, but it can end up just being a little bit luck-based sometimes. It can end up feeling a little bit constrained towards the end, and admittedly, there isn't that much satisfying about pulling off that perfect round where you managed to hide the perfect card, discarded the perfect cards to throw your opponent off. The opponent took the wrong card or the wrong pair and therefore gave you everything you need to set up your board. There's nothing inherently satisfying about it to me personally, just because when you're working with so little information, these victories don't feel earned in the beginning, and towards the end, when you've only got one or two actions and you're able to count the amount of cards that have come out, it ends up being particularly obvious what the right move is or what the right sequence of moves is going to be. And even though the opponent might change things up a little by giving you a pair choice or a 1 out of 3 choice, it still might mean that you didn't really need to change your strategy just based on what you had in your hand, what the state of the board was at the beginning of the round, and what you've just got to work with in general with your actions that are being left over. So the game never manages to get that happy medium where you want a good amount of flexibility and enough information to make something work out of it. It's always low information but high flexibility, which eventually progresses to high information but low flexibility, and it just never manages to be that happy, satisfying middle for me personally. And the people that I've played it with have agreed with this idea, but not in so many words. And as a result, I find it hard to recommend Hanamikoji as it is, just because, well, it's just not satisfying. It just never manages to reach that point. It does sometimes when the cards come out perfectly, the actions you have available left to you are exactly right, but those instances are rare, and something along the lines of 1 in 10 games turns out that way. And then there are some decisions that just kind of bug me. Like, for example, you've got the 7 big geisha cards out here, but they've also included 4 promo geisha cards. You've got Christmas time, you've got Halloween, you've got Chinese New Year, and you've got, I don't know, K-On! Appreciation Day. But you've got just these 4 promos, but it's only these 4 promos. They don't do anything, they just look different. And why not the entire set? Why not the other 3? I'm not entirely sure. I don't really see the point. They say on the back of the box here that it is a set of 4 promos, but I have no sign that this is like a first printing or anything. Maybe I just got a first edition one. But there's also the fact that the box is too big. Now, it's not that big of a game just in general, right? In a vacuum. But here's the thing. You've got these 11 maiden cards, technically, right? But if you converted them into just regular poker-sized cards, you could easily fit this in half the box size. You could easily put everything in this one part of the box here with all the tokens on top, and then just turn these like manuals here into like tiny little booklets that you sit on top, and that would work, and it would halve the size of the box. But of course, it's gone for the style over substance argument that board games have, where the boxes need to be bigger in order to stand out on the shelves. And I just admit that I'm not really that big a fan of that concept. It just kind of takes up too much room, especially for someone like me in particular. And I know this is specific to me, but I hope this will help you out. Since I go to a board game meetup, and I've got like a minimum amount of space, well, a maximum amount of space I should say, that black crate over there. If I can't fit the game into that crate, I probably won't be taking it. If this was half the size, it would be a lot easier to justify taking along. But since it is as big as it is, it means that it's kind of a pain in order to actually get it anywhere without getting in the way of other games that might be worth the time more. So it's unfortunate that, and you never know if you end up going to be playing a 2-player game specifically anyway. So just to sum everything up really quick, I kind of like the idea of the game. The actions give you some interesting flexibility, but considering that the game is entirely based around figuring out information purely by the cards that you have available to you and the cards that have been played on the field, you end up in this weird position of game where on the left hand, at the beginning of the game, you've got very little information but a lot of flexibility, and then at the end of the game, you've got all the information you could want or possibly need, but very little flexibility. And it never feels like it really meets up in the middle enough that I would like. Sometimes you'll get that, but sometimes through no fault of your own. You just ended up using the wrong cards that you never saw coming because you had to go first and you had to do something and you weren't sure what. Or because you just ended up getting to the end of the game on a certain set of actions, and then because you've only got one action left, that's the action you have to take, and therefore you just end up playing out whatever it is and you end up losing as a result to that. It never feels like it's truly in your control. Sometimes it does, most of the time it doesn't. Combine that with the fact that the game's bigger than it needs to be, and it just gives you some weird promos for no reason. This isn't the worst thing in the world. I'm not really, dumping on the game for these promos, but it just feels weird to only have 4 promos for 4 maidens and not 7. So as a result, I find it kind of hard to recommend Hanamikoji, especially over the top of a bunch of other 2-player games that are out there, like Watergate, or Innovation, or Control, or Seven Wonders Duel, or a bunch of other 2-player games that are out there, because it doesn't have particularly satisfying play, just again due to the fact that you're kind of stuck in one extreme or another extreme most of the time, and the box is just too big. I'd rather take along just another 2-player game that I can more easily fit inside of a certain box. With that said, this has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.